What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, November 28th, 2016. Just coming back from a long Thanksgiving weekend, and I hope you had as much fun as I did. It was nice just having that 4-day break. I spent most of it, in addition to the usual munching on turkey and everything, restringing my wife's harp, 38-string Celtic harp. I couldn't marry a woman who played the ukulele, but we finally got that done. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, but I'm going to tell you I'm going to be very selective about the phone calls because I got a lot of stuff to get through. So if you're calling in just to hear your own voice or to call me bad names, I'd appreciate you not even bothering because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, earlier today, big story was all over the news about how there was an active shooter situation at Ohio State University, and everybody was on lockdown, and the gun grabbers were out there saying it's time for an executive order banning guns. And then, to their disappointment, it turned out the attacker didn't have a gun. I'm sure they were out there saying, quick, somebody planted an AR-15 on him. Turned out he had a butcher knife and a car. He basically rammed his car into a crowd of people, got out with a butcher knife, slashed some people badly. Some had to go to the hospital. The only fatality is the suspect himself. And it was all over the independent media almost at once. This guy is a Somali refugee, and the corporate media is only just now catching up with us on that one. So it's another reminder that this refugee program isn't all that it is cracked up to be. Now, the other big news, of course, has to do with Jill Stein's recount effort, which as of last look is already beginning to fall apart. And certainly the criticism by independent media, even some corporate media, by other politicians, is very negative on this whole thing. We have an article that came out of Zero Hedge, Losers Who Won't Lose. What are the odds of a successful Hillary recount? The odds are rapidly going down. Now, the plan here was there was a long shot to reverse the results in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which would hand Hillary the White House at the Electoral College. It's already run into some major roadblocks. As it turns out, under Pennsylvania state law, Jill Stein cannot file a direct request for a recount. It has to go through court. They have to go on in and present a prima facie case of election fraud, and then the court decides whether there's going to be a recount. There's only about 3 weeks left until the Electoral College meets anyway. It does appear that Jill Stein may have missed a key deadline to get this thing going in the first place. Now, everybody's out there saying we suspect there may have been fraud. We don't have any evidence of fraud. And this is a classic case of hoisting on your own petard because the Hillary campaign cannot go down that path of we think there was election fraud because if anybody were to actually look for election fraud, guess who they're going to discover the fraudster actually is. So even the Hillary campaign is out there saying, oh, no, there's no evidence of fraud in Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania. We're just going along with Jill Stein just to go along with her. Now, Wisconsin's Elections Commission has already rejected Jill Stein's request for a hand recount across the state. They're leaving it up to the state counties to determine how they will proceed. They can either do a count by hand or just run them through the machine again. And this being a GOP state, I think they're probably going to just run them through the machine again. And so this is a major, major setback. Now, Michigan finally has certified Donald Trump as the winner of that state and its electors. Why did it take so long? Well, because under Michigan law, the machine count was so close, a hand recount was mandated automatically, and they just finished it. Michigan has already had a hand recount. Donald Trump is still the winner. So Jill Stein and Hillary are 0 for 3 right now. Now, Stein is already out there on her website saying, well, you know, we're not going to guarantee that all this money, $7 million, is going to go to the recount. We guarantee we're going to ask for the recount, and if it doesn't happen, well, we'll find something else to do with all that money. We're going to work for election integrity. And I guess they don't call it the Green Party for nothing because Jill is definitely grabbing for the green here. And there is a little wrinkle in campaign finance law that you need to be aware of. and that is when a candidate retires from public life, as it looks like Jill Stein is about to do, they're allowed to keep, for their own use, any funds left in their campaign war chest that weren't spent. So Jill Stein might have just built her golden parachute at the expense of all the suckers who actually thought she had a chance at reversing the election outcome, that being mostly George Soros. Even CNN, the Clinton News Network, is admitting this whole recount nonsense was pointless and will not change the election results. And, you know, it seems like only yesterday when Hillary Clinton supporters were telling Bernie Sanders supporters, just get over it, all this talk about the rigged primaries, and yeah, maybe some fraud was detected, but it's time for you to just get over it and move on. Boy, talk about double standards. In fact, if the liberals didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. We're going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about the rapidly crumbling attempt by Jill Stein to get recounts in 3 states that Donald Trump won by narrow margins, while ignoring other states that Hillary won by even slimmer margins. We don't need to recount those. Those are Hillary's. We don't need to recount that. Now, needless to say, the public perception of this has been very negative. There's a backlash. We're seeing articles like this one that came out of paulcraigroberts.org. Jill Stein is discrediting environmentalists and third parties by acting like this. She's acting like a spoiled brat. And here's where it gets kind of interesting. There was no way a recount was going to change the outcome for Jill Stein herself. So it was obvious right from the beginning she was doing this at the behest of Hillary Clinton. And speaking of environmentalists, I mean, Stein is already out there talking about how she's railing against big carbon and big banks and big pharma. But in examination of her investment portfolio, she's invested in these very companies, these corporations. She's wholly on board with big carbon and big pharma and big banking in terms of her own personal portfolio. Another article that came on out, and this is in the Daily Mail over in Great Britain. The only thing Hillary is going to achieve by backing Jill Stein's shameless recount stunt is to make herself a 2-time loser and drag America's reputation as a democracy through the mud. How very Clinton of her. And they're absolutely right. Especially after all the talk about demanding Trump accept the outcome of the election, and then to see this circus unfolding. It's making the Democrats look bad. It's making liberals look bad. It certainly makes the Hillary campaign look bad. And this is going to work against the Democrats in elections to come. That they are cheaters, whiners, poor losers. Even Democrats, leading Democrats, are out there saying it's time to call this off. It's not going to work. It's making us all look bad. Even Barack Obama has come on out saying this is nonsense. The results of the election accurately reflect the will of the American people. And Hillary's people are still out there saying, oh, she won the popular vote. She won the popular vote. It's not a popular vote contest. Donald Trump won the election by the rules both sides agreed to play by going in, and you don't get to change the rules after the game is played because you don't like the outcome. All right, let's take a phone call. Bill in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. I'm a town chairman in Wisconsin, and, the people vote at our local town hall. We were concerned about vote fraud because we had, heard about the situation from Bev Harris. So what I told the clerk was, when we vote, we just fill in ovals. Then you put it in the machine, and the machine says, thank you, your vote has been recorded. It does not give you any kind of a paper trail. It doesn't say you voted for such and such candidate. But at the end of the evening, there's a tape that comes out with the results. Now, the paper ballots then fall down into the machine. So I told my clerk, I said, at the end of the night, when that total comes out, I would ask you to take the paper ballots and see how close they are to the tape. And we had 1,098 votes cast in the election. Trump got, 679. Hillary got 347. The tape showed that she had 348. So it was only off by one, and I consider that a wash. Now, it was the same thing for all the other townships in the county. Trump won by over 60%. We have two cities. All of the precincts showed Trump winning. There was one precinct that had Hillary winning by only a couple votes. So, if they do it either way, hand count these ballots, or if they run them through the machine, I'm confident we're still going to prevail, unless they come up with, some hidden ballots in the southeast part of the state.
Well, anything is possible here, but at this point, if she can't get Pennsylvania, and she can't, it's got to go to court, and Michigan is already certified following a hand recount, then Hillary cannot take the presidency at the Electoral College. It would take 20, 30 faithless electors. The very worst she can do is throw it into the House of Representatives, where the House would vote for Donald Trump, and probably. There is no way forward. The only way it's going to happen, and we need to be alert for this, is if Donald Trump is assassinated before the 19th, then the Electoral College could throw the White House to Hillary Clinton. So I hope Donald Trump's security people are listening to this very, very closely. Double up, be alert, drink a lot of black coffee, wear your armor, and be careful, because Hillary clearly has not accepted defeat. She's acting like a very spoiled child. But if you look at the history of the Clintons, they've always gotten everything they wanted. They have never been held to account for any of their crimes. When you look at a mindset like that, I can guarantee you they're seriously considering if they could get away with assassination of Donald Trump. So everyone needs to be on their guard. Oh, and by the way, Bill,
I worry about that. Also, possible race riots. Funded by Soros. What I would say is that I hope Trump does not back off on locking her up.
He hasn't. That was made up by the New York Times reporters, and the New York Times has acknowledged the error on page 822 underneath the obituaries of a more recent edition here. And by the way, Bill, thank you for taking that extra step of verifying what was going on in your precinct. And we had even heard before the election happened that Wisconsin, because of that concern about election fraud, that they were taking steps to guarantee the accuracy of the election. We have 2 years to put together a much more reliable, honest election system, more transparent, and that's certainly what I'm going to be working on starting as soon as Donald Trump is inaugurated.
Yeah, okay.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Bill.
Report from here. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much for that update. All right, now then, it's about to get a little bit stickier for Jill Stein, because a member of her own party, the U.S. Green Party, has basically filed a complaint with the Wisconsin Attorney General alleging that Jill Stein committed perjury on this document in order to try and get the recount. And so now the Wisconsin Attorney General is looking at this and may simply reject her petition for the recount purely on the fact that she made untrue statements on that original filing. Now, Donald Trump has finally come on out and said something that we've known all along. When you deduct all of the illegal immigrant votes for Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump won that popular vote. VoteFraud.org did a study based on voter registration data and concluded at least 3 million non-citizens voted in this election overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton. And now True the Vote has come on out with their own study supporting that conclusion. And so Donald Trump is now out there answering the corporate media's claims about, well, Hillary won the popular vote. Shouldn't you just give her the White House? He says, no, I won the popular vote. when you take out the people who weren't supposed to be voting, the illegal immigrants and all the dead people, Donald Trump won that popular vote. The fact that it is so difficult to validate what happened on Election Day is a damning statement about the current condition of our election system. It is possible to have fair, honest, accurate elections. In fact, I absolutely refuse to accept that the nation that put men on the moon cannot come up with a fail-safe, accurate, verifiable, transparent election system. I refuse to accept that. That our election system is this wide open to fraud and this difficult to validate and verify and audit. It is by design to keep the power elite, and they failed this time. We have a window of opportunity to demand changes to that election system and return control to the American people. All right, we're going to take a quick phone call from Michael in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha, Michael, and that's a definite on your recent comment there. It's all a fraud and by design on the elections. And you're right, we have to address that right off the bat when Trump's administration comes in, turn that around. But I just want to remind everybody on your previous statements pertaining to potential assassination that the Clintons would definitely be contemplating that. I just want to remind everyone that that's exactly what they did to John Kennedy Jr.
Mm-hmm. That's the suspicion. They're the ones with the means, motive, and opportunity. Same thing with Vince Foster. There's a long trail of dead bodies behind the Clintons, and I don't think they would hesitate to take a shot at Donald Trump if they thought they could get away with it. And don't forget, there were 2 attempts. There was the mysterious breakdown of his campaign aircraft early in the year, and then there was that other guy who grabbed a gun from a security guard and tried to shoot Trump. So, I know Trump's got his own security that's operating inside the Secret Service protective detail, and he needs to have that. He needs a multi-layered personal defense right now.
That's right, Michael. There's no question about them remaining extremely vigilant from here on out to protect President-elect Trump. No questioning that JFK Jr. was taken out by the Clintons. She had no chance of moving up into New York State and becoming senator at the snap of a finger overnight unless she had fast-track backing by the Rockefellers, and also JFK Jr. had to be removed since he was contemplating, and unfortunately he mentioned this, he didn't reveal his interest in running for Senate until it was too late for him to get the public exposure and protection.
Now, wait a minute. That's not true, because there was actually an issue of Newsweek that was headed for the newsstands with the announcement of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s run for the Senate, and when his plane crashed, that Newsweek was literally yanked off the news racks and sent back to Newsweek to be destroyed.
Okay, perfect, Michael. There you go. That's excellent reporting on your part to verify what I just said. And the facts are that his plane was bullet-ridden, shot down, and him and his wife were buried at sea without the family allowing them to have a funeral at home. That's a cover-up all the way because they were shot down and they had...
Well, hold it. There's no evidence they were shot down. The evidence indicates an onboard bomb. And again, there was very little shown of the aircraft wreckage, but as near as I can tell, it was an onboard bomb because every time there's a small plane accident that benefits the Clintons, it's usually involving an onboard bomb, usually thermite that cuts through the hydraulic and electrical cables. That's what happened with Ron Brown. Okay, Michael, thanks an awful lot.
Okay. Michael, let me just say that's. There was a report that part of the wreckage washed up along Massachusetts shoreline, and it was bullet-ridden. It showed
I never saw that. I never saw that report. If you can find it, send it to me. Okay? If you can.
I don't know. Okay.
Okay. If you can find it, send it to me. But I want to see a source on that. What we do know. Well, actually, we need to take a break for commercials. More about John F. Kennedy Jr. when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I just reposted my article on John F. Kennedy Jr.'s assassination to the main page at WhatReallyHappened.com. Now, what we do know about John F. Kennedy Jr., he had already told his own magazine staff he was going to run. He had announced it. It was in Newsweek, but that issue was yanked from the stands following his death. And the corporate media, as we now look back and realize, was just putting out a lot of lies. They originally said JFK Jr. was completely lost, but the radio logs showed that he was exactly where radar said he was. They were out there saying JFK Jr. was in over his head, that he was an inexperienced pilot. Actually, he had reached the point where he was ready to take his instrument rating examinations. And he stalled his plane. It's not what the radar track shows. And it was all these things. Didn't know his altitude, didn't know his this, couldn't handle in the dark and hazy, everything out there. This weather was bad and everything. No, it wasn't. I have family who lives on Martha's Vineyard, and they said that night the sky was clear. They could see the stars. They could see airplanes over by the mainland, which means aircraft in the air by the mainland could easily see Martha's Vineyard. And the claim that Martha's Vineyard was too dark to find was nonsense, because they had just installed some extraordinarily bright lights in one of the towns. They were so bright, in fact, residents were complaining that at night the glow in the sky was disturbing them. But the reality is that it was a very, very convenient death. Now, getting on back to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, like John F. Kennedy, has a lot of enemies, not just the Clintons. This idea that people are assassinated for just one reason by one party is part of the big lie. John F. Kennedy's assassination involved a lot of players, so they all had plausible deniability. It involved the Texas oil billionaires, the CIA, angry over the Bay of Pigs situation and the attempt by Kennedy to break the CIA up. The Federal Reserve was opposed to him because of Executive Order 11110. Israel was opposed to John F. Kennedy because he didn't want them to get nuclear weapons, and on and on and on. Same thing with Donald Trump. Yes, the Clintons are a threat to him, and so is everybody the Clintons ever did crooked business with, because Hillary has made no secret of the fact if she goes down in prosecution, she's going to take everybody else with her. Doomsday device. So, again, there's a lot of oxes that got gored with Donald Trump's victory, and he's got a lot of enemies, and I'm sure he's aware of that, and I just hope he's got a really, really good protective detail, because I would not at all be surprised if there's another attempt on his life before the 19th. Now then, as I mentioned before, this story that came out of the New York Times that Donald Trump was not going to criminally prosecute Hillary undermined his support, really caused him a lot of damage, and it turned out to be a misquote by the two reporters who interviewed him, who were liberal Hillary supporters, and, oh, good, Hillary's off the hook. He's going to let her go. He doesn't want revenge. But if you look at the actual transcript of the interview, it's very clear. What Trump said was, investigating the Clintons is not a priority, and I'm not seeking revenge. But when they asked him specifically, are you taking the investigations off the table, he said no. And the New York Times has been forced to backtrack on that, but the damage has already been done. People are out there believing that original headline. Now, in point of fact, Donald Trump is reaffirmed in criminal investigation of Hillary over her email server and her so-called charitable foundation will move forward. Ultimately, it isn't Trump's decision to make. It'll be up to whoever he appoints as Attorney General and head of the FBI. And so far, it looks like these are people who are going to actually want to do their job. So the prosecutions are moving forward. And not only that, Donald Trump is sending signals to foreign governments that as far as he's concerned, they're welcome to probe the Clinton Foundation from their end to see if there was any corruption going on with their officials. Now, there's been another WikiLeaks expose, and it's in the emails that confirm that one of the largest Hillary super PACs, Priorities USA, was coordinating directly with the Hillary Clinton campaign. That's a violation of campaign finance laws. She can be prosecuted on that one alone. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm glad I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving 4-day week or 5-day week.
4-day weekend.
But anyway, I was sitting there watching the other night on one of the cable shows the National Enquirer investigates, and they had something on Marilyn Monroe, and they sort of like had a JFK connection, saying they might have been murdered by the Kennedy.
Hello? Hello? Oh, my goodness, George in Texas has been assassinated. Are you hearing me, Mike, in the control room?
I guess we lost him.
I guess we lost him. Okay. Boy, this third world tech support here from our phone companies is really getting to be rather a drag here. Following up on George's comment, and yes, I heard a lot about this when I was working inside Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe had affairs both with John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and was threatening to go public. And that's not something that you do with the President of the United States of America. Now, as you know, there's a big battle going on over who is going to be the Secretary of State. Mitt Romney and his supporters are pushing this as if it's a done deal, and it's triggered a tremendous backlash from a lot of Trump supporters. So I dug out that old video when Mitt Romney came to town, which was a video that was prepared in advance of Romney's run for the presidency, showing how his past history is one of unbridled predatory capitalism, going into towns, buying up the factories, selling off the assets, firing everybody from their job, and making a fortune in the process and moving on. And plus the fact that Mitt Romney has almost zero foreign policy credentials going on in. I really don't think Donald Trump is seriously considering him. But we do know that Donald Trump is considering retired General David Petraeus, former CIA director. Now, that's somebody who really does understand foreign policy. And despite his rather ignoble ejection from power, I think Petraeus might actually make a good Secretary of State. I understand we have George in Texas back. And, George, what's on your mind?
Well, I said, we're talking about Marilyn Monroe, the murder or probable suicide of Marilyn Monroe and JFK. And they're sitting there trying to pin it on. It might have been the Kennedys that probably had her murdered, or the Mafia, or the CIA, because what she knew.
Well, that's certainly the story that I heard when I was working inside Hollywood. I guess you missed that part of it when you dropped the phone connection. But that's certainly what I heard.
Another thing I've been hearing, in rumors I was hearing in the papers, local papers, that I'm hearing government agency workers might go on strike if when Trump gets sworn in. Well, guess what? Good thing. Go ahead. I hope he does like Reagan did with the air traffic controller, saying you're fired.
Well, Trump's really good at saying that, and I think that would be a good thing for him to do.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jeff in Minnesota. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, an example of suppression of free speech is every time you go to the gas station and you step out to pump gas, the music is so loud you can't talk to the person in the car or standing next to you.
Well, I guess there are some sacrifices that must be made to keep your car running on the road here. All righty, moving on along here. Thank you very much for the call and the humor and everything. Now, on a more serious note, as you know, the corporate media has openly declared a war against the independent media. In their eyes, we're all Russian stooges, and we're trying to bring back communism to the United States, and we're doing all these evil things, and there's no substance to it whatsoever. And Ron Paul, apparently one of his websites, was listed in that Washington Post article of websites that are dishing Russian propaganda to the American people to make them not trust their government and vote for Donald Trump and so forth and so on. It's actually a very long list. I'm rather proud that I'm on it myself. But it is a who's who of the independent media. And it's having the Banned in Boston effect because people are looking at that list and saying, I wonder what's going on. And traffic to all those websites is actually going up here. And Ron Paul is out there saying we can expect such attacks to continue because what has happened, the 2016 election, has made it very clear the corporate media has failed in its assigned task, which is to keep you, the American people, ignorant dependent on the government for what you're thinking, to tell you what it is important, what isn't important. They've lost control of the minds of America. And that's been the real job of the corporate media all along, to keep you happy and duped and stupid and ignorant. And the big lie is they're fully informing you when, in fact, the actual job description is the opposite. Well, now they've lost that. And people are going to the independent media, and so they're out there screaming, oh, they're Russian stooges. Even Glenn Greenwald is out there condemning Washington Post's cowardly group of anonymous smear artists because the Washington Post cited a single source for this hate list of theirs and this prop or not group. Their website domain was registered only last summer. They're registered through a private registration company, so you don't know who they actually are. They're certainly not listed on the website itself. It's just somebody put up a website saying these are Russian propaganda websites, and the Washington Post quoted it as if it were gospel truth. So, it's a smear job. It's an absolute... okay, hang on a second. We have some problems with our little mixer at this end. So the Washington Post is basically, it's a smear. And for all we know, the Washington Post set up this website themselves to cite as their source. It's called propaganda laundering. Another good example would be the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is run out of a single house in Coventry, England by a guy whose main business is selling T-shirts. And he just posts on his website whatever he wants to post, and the corporate media cites it as an unimpeachable source for what's really going on inside Syria, and much of it has been discredited. And it's called propaganda laundering. Now, there are some websites out there, and some of them were on that list, that do put out really bad news, kooky stuff. WhatDoesItMean.com is notorious. Sorshafal is a known disinfo agent. But somebody did a study, actually it was National Public Radio, was looking at the worst of the independent media, the least responsible, the ones that were putting out stuff about Nibiru and Planet X and all this other garbage that was out there, chemtrails and HAARP, and discovered that the majority of these websites are run by a single Democratic organization in California called Disinfo Media. In other words, they're setting up their own websites to misbehave in order to tarnish those of us in the independent media who are trying to be professional about what we're doing. Now, Google has announced from now on they will rig search results and eliminate all links to news outlets they consider fake, which is anybody who's not parroting the official U.S. government story about anything. The reality is, the corporate media needs a scapegoat. They have lost control of the minds of America. Their financial backers are coming on in and saying, look, what do you think we pay you all this money to do? We don't pay you all this money to be truthful with the American people. We pay you all this money for you to sell them. The next policy, the next tax, the next president, the next war. And if you can't do that, why should we pay you? And the corporate media, rather than acknowledge that their long history of lies has come back to haunt them, oh, it's all the fault of the independent media. Those people out there with their websites, it's all their fault. We have to destroy them. So they're looking for a scapegoat here. Now, John Rappaport has an observation. There's another aspect to the independent media that is very threatening to the system. And that is that most of the independent media websites, like Drudge Report, like WhatReallyHappened.com, are very small operations, 1 or 2 people. And it's making it look like individual opinion is now just as valid and important as the group think. Because part of the corporate media's job over the last couple of decades has been to convince you that everybody should be in agreement, everybody should be thinking what you are told the consensus thinks. That was the whole point of rigging those Hillary polls, to show her ahead by 12 points, to get you all to say, oh, well, if the rest of the country thinks Hillary is okay, I must think okay as well. And now that group think as a priority, as a social steering mechanism, that is also being destroyed. So, we're going to take a phone call. John in Texas. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Yes. I wanted to talk about the military budget that was, well, I had watched it and I was thinking about calling you and talking to you about it. Like $577 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I looked on the YouTube and, you know, it was funny how you were talking about all these news stories and everything. All these news stories have so many views, so many comments, but this story that I'm talking about right now, I go onto the YouTube videos and everything. Some of them have less than 5 views. No, none of them have no comments. Some of them have less than 100 views. Like, nobody even cares to think that, what are we going to spend this money on? $577 billion. I mean, what has been bought that justifies that?
Well, we bought the Gerald R. Ford, which can't fight in combat. We bought the F-35, which can't really fight in combat. We bought the F-22, which asphyxiates its pilots. We've bought the Independence-class littoral combat ships, which are corroding. We bought the Freedom-class littoral combat ships, which have powertrain problems. We bought the Zumwalt, which is now tied up down in Panama because its drivetrain exploded. That's what we bought with all this money. And I think a lot of people are justified in saying, you know, that money might be better spent rebuilding America's infrastructure instead of all these toys for the military.
Is it true that a quarter of that budget could end, like, world hunger?
The numbers have gone along quite a bit, but, I mean, the reality is $500 billion poured back into the civilian economy would do wonders for this country. The reality is this nation has been suffering under a wartime economy ever since 2001. They didn't want to admit it, but all you need to do is look around at all the retail vacancies, the homeless problem, the shattered concrete in the roads, the collapsing bridges, all the stuff that power that doesn't work, phones that won't work correctly, and you realize our nation has been allowed to rot on the vine in support of this war agenda, which now looks like it's on the verge of collapse.
That's true, because the city I'm in right now, it's rush hour traffic, and on 2 main roads, the lights are out. The traffic lights are out. Like, they couldn't even, they can't even maintain the light. Like, that's the sad thing, and nobody asked those questions. Everybody asked all the other questions, but nobody asked the budget question, like, why?
Well, I think now, I think
all their laundry.
This is a problem that's going to solve itself because Donald Trump has clearly indicated that this policy of aggression, of sticking our noses into other people's countries, is not going to be part of his administration, and so it will be justified by the American people to demand a peace dividend, that some of that money being poured into the Pentagon be returned back to the American people. Now, Donald Trump says he wants a strong military, by which I think he wants to dump all these boondoggle costly programs and start weapons procurement on the same model as the Russians and the Chinese, where they get a lot more bang for their buck. Russia doesn't spend anywhere near as much of their wealth on war as the United States. Neither does China. And yet they have military that are formidable to the eyes of American planners. We're seeing all these Pentagon officials saying, well, yes, we've blown through all these trillions of dollars, but we're still inferior. We need more money. And I think Trump is going to say, it's time for you to become more cost effective. And
hopefully he builds up the military. Hopefully he builds up the military in a way where he just gets more people in, uses the money to pay them, and uses, since their time in, uses them as the like the Army engineers to rebuild.
That may be one way to do it, but I mean, from my point of view, the entire war machine of the United States is all about offense, invasion, and conquest, because anybody who actually tried to invade the United States is going to be met with a nuclear response. We don't need, if we're talking about defending our nation, then the only thing that we really need is our nuclear arsenal. We don't need 17 carrier groups prowling the oceans. We don't need 800 bases in foreign countries. We can just shut them all down, save all the money, bring everybody home, and just say, look, we're going to mind our own business. We're not going to stick our nose into your business, but if you try and mess with us, there's going to be a mushroom cloud over your capital city. And that will be the end of that.
Yeah, just do what like the Chinese do and use their people, use their troops to help internal projects. Like I said, you know, like Because the more money given to the average person, the more real money they could buy, like precious metals and stuff like that, so they could prepare themselves.
Well, I'm not on board with you on that one. I advise people to buy precious metals as a wealth preserver, but in terms of rebuilding the economy, we don't want to dead end a huge amount of our wealth in acquisition of commodities. The focus has to be on rebuilding our manufacturing, getting our agriculture back to organic, natural, non-GMO that other people want to buy. That's going to take a considerable investment. I think Trump is right to tell NASA to stop supporting this whole global warming nonsense and go back to exploring the solar system, because the technologies developed to solve those problems are going to be the foundation of the industries and high-tech products of the future. The tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s was all born in that technology incubator called the Apollo Moon Program. And we need to do that again to leapfrog ahead of all these countries that we foolishly allowed to take over the manufacturing of the technology we invented during Apollo. They're not going to give it back. We're going to have to leap forward over them, okay?
You're right, and that $500 billion would do wonders for that.
Absolutely. 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 All right, well, all right, thanks. We're going to have to let you go here and take a break. We've got a couple more phone calls waiting when we come on back. Then we'll be getting back into more and more news as we get into hour number 2 of our program today. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show here, and that was my mistake at my end, Mike. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here real quick. Glenn in Philadelphia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. You know, I think it's been kept hush-hush far too long, and it's high time the American people know that Marilyn Monroe was...
Okay, well, thank you for that opinion, and we're going to let you go and switch over to Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Good to talk to you. My question is, if, God forbid, something terrible happens to Trump and he's taken out, could the Electoral College legally still elect him?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, that would certainly put Mike Pence into the White House. I have to be very honest. I don't know. I don't know that that's ever actually come up.
Yeah, it's something that's concerned me.
Well, I think if something were to happen to Donald Trump, there would certainly be a tremendous pressure on the Electoral College to go ahead and vote for Hillary Clinton, because in theory, the delegates, rather the electors, bound to Donald Trump would now be free agents. I think. And again, if somebody has a better clarification on how this would work, please call on in.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now then, people are having fun with this whole corporate media versus independent media kerfuffle, as it were. And apparently over at the New York Times, they are being deluged with mail containing salt, as in to pour into your wounds. So far, 2,600 pounds of salt have been mailed to the New York Times. Now, there's a message for you. Donald Trump, along with his bashing of the media titans in that meeting, is signaling that the corporate media is not going to be his conduit of choice with the American people, and continues to communicate with the American people directly via social media, YouTube videos, Twitter distribution. And the corporate media is finding itself being handed their hats and edged toward the doors. I think it was great that Donald Trump made a point of calling Alex Jones. Of course, Donald, you're always welcome to call into this show. But it does signal this is a seismic shift in how information is disseminated throughout our society. And clearly, the corporate media controlled propagandistic ministry of truth is on the wane. Because the internet, if you think about it, is the purest expression of a true democracy, and it's functioning as one right now. Story that came out from Investment Watch blog is how Obama is literally out there lamenting that you, the American people, have too much access to information. You know things that we don't want you to know. You think about things we don't want you to think about. We know what's best, really. Honest. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Getting into the war zones, and they are trying to crank up as many as they can before Trump takes office. Apparently, Obama just labeled Somalia as a target of the global war on terror, and how amazingly coincidental we have a Somali refugee slash up a bunch of people at Ohio State University. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Yes. Nothing there, whatever. Over in Syria, the U.S. effort to oust Assad, or at least get a war going there, is crumbling rapidly. Egypt has now stepped into the fight as well. The jihadi fronts are falling apart. The water supply for Aleppo is back in the hands of the Syrian government. The U.S.-backed terrorists were using the threat of shutting off water to keep the people in Aleppo under control. And now the waterworks are back in the control of the government, and the water is flowing. People are able to drink, cook food, bathe, do whatever it is they're going to do here. So far, the Syrian government forces have liberated about 40% of East Aleppo from the terrorists, this according to the Reconciliation Center. And this is less about fighting and more about these terrorist-controlled areas accepting Assad's amnesty. They walk on in, surrender their weapons, say, we were wrong. And I don't think the fact that the U.S. is now assassinating all of their contact people in these groups is helping the situation. These U.S.-backed terrorists are realizing the U.S. has left them to hang out to dry. So, of course, they're going to accept the amnesty at this point. Now, the House has passed a resolution for a Syrian no-fly zone, trying to provoke that open war with Russia. And I think at this point, it's time for Syria and Russia to take the United States to the United Nations to say to the world, the United States has no reason to be in Syria at all. Russia is there at the express invitation of and permission by the Syrian government. The U.S. isn't there. The U.S. is the invader and the aggressor. And calling it a no-fly zone does not erase the fact that what they're talking about is a blockade of the airspace over somebody else's country. But as I said before, now that everybody is sort of getting used to the idea that Trump is going to be the president, the war hawks are going to try and get a hot war going and stick him with it. And I don't think they're done in Syria just yet, because over on Twitter, there's this new Twitter account that just showed up in September, and it purports to be the Twitter feed of a 7-year-old living in Aleppo named Bana Alabed. And it has tweets like, tonight we have no house, it's bombed and I got in rubble, I saw deaths and I almost died. Because as we know, when you're a 7-year-old and your house is bombed, the first thing you're going to do is go to Twitter, right? It's another propaganda fraud. Oh, feel sorry for the children of Aleppo. That's why we have to send your children into Syria to beat those mean old Russians. Now, Russia is reporting that U.S.-backed terrorists are using chemical weapons in Hosh village in the Aleppo countryside. So it's still going on out there. And here's an article that came out of Huffington Post. And we know Huffington Post is very liberal biased. And their headline reads, Afghanistan is already to be Donald Trump's first foreign policy disaster. And this validates what I said about sticking Donald Trump with other people's problems. Donald Trump did not create the mess in Afghanistan. That goes all the way back to 2001 and El Presidente de Uno Kyle's installation as the president of Afghanistan following the U.S. invasion. And it's been nothing but trouble ever since, all in the name of oil and opium flowing to America's ultra-elites. But it is falling apart. And what they're trying to do is they're going to say, oh, when it falls apart, it's all Donald Trump's fault. No, it's the fault of George W. Bush, who went in there in the first place. Huffington Post is being a little bit less than honest. Of course, from the Huffington Post point of view, a foreign policy success in Afghanistan is Afghanistan as a puppet-ruled client state of the United States of America, because we're great and they're bad. 4,000 NATO troops are taking part in Lithuania's largest exercise near Russia's border. Poke, 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 poke. Ooh, Russia's bad, Russia's bad. We got to put our troops on the border. Poke, 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 poke. Sir Michael Fallon is out there saying that NATO is prepared to go to war with Russia and respond to Putin's threats. Okay, Sir Michael, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit. Have fun. Putin isn't threatening anybody. Go back over world history, back all the way to 2001. What is the nation that has been invading, regime changing, and drone striking the rest of the world? It's not Russia. The United States is the aggressor. Everybody knows it. The reason the corporate media and Obama and everybody else are out there crying about the independent media is they can't get you to believe this lie that Russia's the bad guy and the U.S. government are the good guys. Because we're all seeing it for ourselves. We're going to take a second to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, also in the news over the weekend, as you probably already heard, Fidel Castro died. He was age 90, had a good run, survived a lot of assassination attempts on him by the CIA. And the headline, as it appeared in the New York Times, Fidel Castro, Cuban revolutionary who defied the United States, dies at 90. And then they had the tagline, Mr. Castro brought the Cold War into the Western Hemisphere, bedeviled 11 American presidents, and briefly pushed the world to the brink of nuclear war. Now, this is the usual high-quality journalistic standards reporting from the New York Times. Because what really happened is Castro rose to power in the aftermath of the U.S.-backed overthrow of Gerardo Machado in 1933. And they installed Batista as a puppet ruler. And Batista basically crushed the people of Cuba. He was selling Cuba's agricultural produce to U.S. companies like United Fruit and PepsiCo at well below market rates, which allowed these corporations to be highly profitable. Now, Cuba under Batista also became the mafia's tropical Las Vegas, just 90 miles away from Florida. No U.S. laws about drugs or anything like that. They built these huge hotels and casinos in Havana. And Havana just became known as this sin bin. They had live sex shows, including women having sex with animals on stage. This is actually hinted at obliquely in the third of the Godfather films. And then finally, in 1959, as happened in Iran in 1979, and then later in Chile, the Cuban people had enough and revolted. And Batista was forced to flee with his supporters, most of whom were allowed to settle in South Florida. Now, this was a huge embarrassment for the United States. Certainly the mafia was very angry about all the money they'd lost in this deal. But Fidel Castro initially tried to normalize relations with the U.S. government. And the U.S. government came on back and said, we'll accept you as the new ruler of Cuba as long as you continue to sell Cuba's produce at below market rates to our companies and you let the mafia back into Havana. And Fidel Castro said no. Cuba's agricultural produce is for sale at the prevailing market rates so the Cuban people who are growing it can have a decent standard of living. At that point, the U.S. government declared this economic embargo to try and crush Cuba's economy and force Cuba to accept the return of Batista. This is what forced Castro to form an alliance with the Soviet Union. Now, this in turn only poured salt into the U.S. government's wounded ego regarding the loss of Cuba as a puppet state. So in 1961, the CIA planned an invasion of Cuba to force Castro out of power and restore puppet rule under Batista. Now, the CIA told President John F. Kennedy that the Cuban people did not support Castro. They'd had revolters' remorse. And they would welcome the liberation of Cuba and the restoration of the Batista regime. So Kennedy approved the operation known as Operation Mongoose to build and arm a Cuban brigade made up of mercenaries and Batista supporters from South Florida, armed through a covert weapons smuggling operation in New Orleans and supported by ships owned by the Zapata Oil Company under the control of George Herbert Walker Bush. The ships were named the Zapata, the Barbara, and the Houston. Kennedy was assured by the CIA that the Cuban people would flock to support the invading brigades, and the invasion was launched at the Bay of Pigs. But the Cuban people instead raced on down to the Bay of Pigs and pounded the American invaders into the sand while the Cuban Air Force planes sank the ships, cutting off the brigade from support or retreat. Kennedy upped the ante, sending unmarked U.S. fighter jets to protect the brigade's B-26 bombers that were trying to hold back Castro's 20,000-strong force, but the fighters arrived late. You're not going to believe this. They were confused by the time zone maps. The bombers were shot down, and the invasion crushed. It was a huge, huge embarrassment. Kennedy publicly accepted responsibility, but privately said the CIA was lying all the way along. Now, John F. Kennedy was forced to violate his own U.S. embargo on Cuba by trading $53 million in baby food and medicine for the survivors of the captured Cuban brigade. Now, the CIA immediately started planning a second invasion of Cuba, as well as carrying out a program of agricultural sabotage against Cuba, which is obliquely referred to in the film The Good Shepherd. Now, the Soviet Union started establishing missile bases in Cuba to guard against that second invasion, and also because the U.S. was installing nuclear missiles in Turkey close to the Russian border. Those of you old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis will probably notice the corporate media didn't mention the U.S. nuclear missiles that were the primary cause of this. So that was the Cuban Missile Crisis and a near miss with nuclear war, but it was all provoked from the U.S. side. Castro had little to do with it. Now, John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev reached a secret deal in which the nuclear missiles were withdrawn from Cuba with the understanding that nuclear war would be the automatic response if there was a second attempt to invade Cuba. So, at that point, Kennedy moved to shut down the CIA's plan for the second invasion and started to dismantle the CIA as having grown dangerously rogue and out of control. Now, following John F. Kennedy's assassination, there was a brief attempt to blame Cuba for it, to anger the American people into supporting a new invasion. Somebody claiming to be Lee Harvey Oswald but looking nothing like him at all applied for a visa in Mexico City to travel to Cuba to lay the paper trail. Now, you remember that rifle that they planted on Oswald, the Mannlicher Carcano? It's called the worst shoulder weapon in the world. In fact, the one that was planted on Oswald had a manufacturing defect. The scope couldn't be aligned to line up with the gun itself. But the Mannlicher Carcano was the weapon Castro was importing by the shipload to arm the Cuban people against a possible second U.S. invasion. That's why that rifle was chosen, to be planted on him. Now, Lyndon Johnson was aware of the secret deal between Kennedy and Khrushchev, and he was convinced Khrushchev would carry out the threat of a nuclear launch. So Lyndon Johnson buried the Cuban link, and Lee Harvey Oswald was recast as the crazed, lone nut assassin who acted on his own, until, of course, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was forced to conclude there had been multiple shooters in Dealey Plaza, and hence a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. And I'm sure the corporate media is going to tell you, this is all fake news. Oh, it's fake news, fake news, fake news. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, really, and if you don't believe that, then you're a Russian stooge. Now, I'm going to have to do a little tip of the hat to Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm not his biggest fan, but he was very gracious in calling up Palestinian Authority leader Abbas and expressing thanks for the Palestinian assistance dealing with these out-of-control wildfires in Israel. Apparently, Israel has not been dealing with the overburden of dried brush, and they've got a real bad problem with wildfires over there. And Palestine sent 8 fire trucks and 40 firefighters to help them deal with that. And Netanyahu was very gracious, and he said, yes, that was a help. All right, so let's talk about the economy. Probably on Friday morning, you were seeing all over the corporate media, oh, Black Friday is underway, the malls are full. And I remembered watching on Fox News where they had some of their talking heads at a local shopping mall. Oh, the sales is underway. And the mall was empty. There was hardly anybody there. We drove by our mall at the bottom of the hill. We weren't dumb enough to go inside. A lot of empty spaces in that parking lot. And here we are Monday. The numbers are coming on in. No, it wasn't a very good Black Friday at all for the malls. And the reason is simple. We don't have any money. Now, the shopping malls and the retailers are out there trying to blame online sales. Oh, those online sales, they're taking it away from us. Well, the online retailers didn't do as good as they thought either. It all comes down to a simple fact. When you have an economic system that sucks all of the wealth out of the entire population and concentrates it at the very top, then ordinary people don't have the money to go to stores to buy the things that are being sold. It's that simple. And why nobody inside the Obama administration could realize that and the necessity of bringing back well-paying jobs to the American people, it's just absolutely a mystery. And it's going to be another disastrous holiday shopping season. Now, there was a very interesting article that came out of Market Watch, and I think this hits the nail right on the head. What Trump voters want is more economic power for themselves. They're not interested in taxes on the rich. They're not interested in handouts. Yes, the permanent poor class, they want more welfare and SNAP and all the rest of it. But the middle class wants to come back, and they want to come back on the strength of their own labor. And they're seeing Make America Great Again as meaning making Americans great again, where economic power is brought back down to the main core of our society. Nobody's looking for a free handout. We simply want an economic climate where we can translate our labor, our entrepreneurialism, into real-world wealth, which we will then take and buy new cars with, new homes with, and take to the shopping malls. It's that simple. Now, I don't envy Donald Trump his new job. It's going to be a major battle. There is no quick fix for the economy. And anybody who thinks there is, you're living in a dream world. We've been losing our manufacturing for 30 years. It's going to take a long time to bring it back. And that is just the reality. Right now, despite all of the amazingly wealthy people who live there, 60% of New Yorkers are one paycheck away from homelessness. The entire country is living on the edge of financial ruin, and that was a big part of why Donald Trump won. Because Hillary Clinton represented a continuance of the current system, and the current system simply does not work for the majority of American people. By the way, if you take California out of the equation, Donald Trump did win that popular vote. All of Hillary's claimed popular vote victory is all concentrated in California, where all those illegal immigrants were in there and voting. And remember, we just put up the videotape where the illegal immigrants are saying, Obama told us it was okay to come here. Now, over in Italy, a lot of people are paying attention to Renzi, who's Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, is coming up on this Italian referendum this weekend. They're saying that if he loses, Italy's 8 major banks could fail. They're caught up in this huge cross-linked net of unpayable debt. And everybody's getting very, very nervous. Meanwhile, up in Brussels, while the European people are struggling with starvation, the European banks are struggling at the edge of collapse, the EU officials voted themselves a pay raise. Retroactive to July, just in time for that Christmas shopping season. See, they're going to be going to the shopping malls and buying all kinds of things for people. It's going to be a Merry Christmas for them. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break. We're going to come right back talking more about the economy, more about Europe, more about Brexit, immigration, human-caused global warming. We got a lot of stuff to get through before the end of the show, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about what's going on over in Europe. Things are in serious trouble over there. And according to Romano Prodi, who led the European Union Commission from 1999 to 2004, he's out there saying basically the European Commission has lost influence, and Angela Merkel's Germany is now effectively ruling Europe. And he's out there saying Brussels' glory days are over. Of course, Juncker has not really impressed too many people with his behavior. But you need to remember the European Union was sold to the people as an open border, free trade bloc. That was it. And over the years, it's metastasized into this continental dictatorship. Whether it's Brussels or Berlin, it's still a bad sign here. Now, over in Stuttgart, Germany, they're still having a problem with their refugees. And apparently there have been 180 rapes, assaults, and robberies by migrants just in this one city. And the government is finally having to admit that, yes, the crime problem has gotten bigger ever since the refugee program started. The official view of Germany and all of the EU is no. Everything is just fine. The refugees are, you're all just imagining things. It's just this vile propaganda campaign to demonize the refugees, and it's all Vladimir Putin's fault or whatever else they're going to say. Now, over in Italy, migrants rioted after being denied asylum. They're refusing to leave the country and demanding their daily allowance. In other words, we got here, where's the free money we were all told we were going to be getting? And it's factionalizing the entire country. Italy's Minister of the Interior is literally telling Italian citizens, if they do not hand their homes over to migrants, they will be thrown into jail. I think it's time for a good old-fashioned revolution over there in Italy here. Now, despite all the bashing of Donald Trump for his wall with Mexico, it now looks like the European countries are planning, as an emergency, to build their own immigrant wall, because as Turkey pivots more toward Russia and China and is no longer interested in joining with the European Union, Erdogan is saying they're just going to open the border gates and let all of those millions of refugees that have been sitting in Turkey to just flock toward Europe. This is going to end badly. We're going to take a phone call. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yes, I'm going to be brutally honest in this short segment. We got Jill Stein. We've got Wolf Blitzer, we've got George Soros. The common denominator is they are all Jews. And until, you recognize that this is the case, they are. Okay. I want to avoid this topic because right now we're seeing this war between the corporate media and the independent media, and they're looking for anything that they can use to demonize us. And I've already seen a whole flood of posts, out there about how WhatReallyHappened.com is this anti-Semitic site who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. Okay? And John, hang on. Okay? I'm telling you, I'm drawing a line in the sand. If you want to talk about the actions of these people, that's fine. Okay, but I'm not going to go along with this generalization, and mostly because I've known some Jewish people I really, really think very well of. And again, I'm going to go back to Renee Valenti, who was just this amazing sweetheart person, and she was Jewish. Okay, I agree that there is. Gilad Atzmon is a shining example.
Exactly.
But what I'm trying to tell you is this is, the ADL, the SPLC, the APACs. These are a Trojan horse inside your nation, and I'm with Zundel on this point of view. It has to be tackled. All the dual citizen Israelis in Congress, the Senate.
Yeah, but now, this moment is not the time to do it, okay? After January 20th, we can raise it as an issue, because it is a valid issue, and I think Donald Trump and his administration are going to be sensitive to that idea of too much outside influence. Okay, but right now is not the right moment to do it. So, John, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back after these few words. And welcome back to the show here. And I want to step back to Israel's fires because those are a real problem, and I feel bad for everybody who's in the path of those fires. When the fires first started, Israel was out there saying these were acts of terror by the Palestinians, the usual blah, 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 blah. And it was kind of weird how fast that story went away. And now I just got an email from a listener who says that over on Twitter, people are posting photographs showing that all these wildfires are the result of settlers going on out on a new massive campaign of burning the olive trees of the Palestinians. And apparently the wind was up too high, the flames jumped over, hit the dry brush, and it's just out there, and it's not pleasant for anybody. And that's, I guess, why they backed off saying, well, technically it was an act of terror, but it's just the wrong terrorists, so we're not going to report that. Getting on back to Europe, as you know, ever since the Brexit vote went on through, and the Remain people are whining and crying and wringing their hands and trying to find some machination to overturn the result of the election, a lot like Hillary's people are doing. And it's all about dragging Great Britain back into the slavery of the European Central Bank, without which they're going to be much better off. And all of the financial analysts looking at Britain's economy after they sever their relationship with the European Union are showing it's going to take off. It's going to be booming. And that's hardly a surprise, because the European Union sucked a huge amount of wealth out of Great Britain and gave virtually nothing back except a bunch of refugees. Germany and Great Britain together were holding up the rest of the EU. That's why they're so desperate to keep Great Britain in there. It's a source of money that they can use to float this Ponzi scheme European Central Bank scam along a little bit longer. And the British people don't want to have that. And all the numbers are showing that once Britain is operating as a sovereign, independent nation, their lives are going to be better. And I can imagine that following the Brexit, and by the way, there doesn't need to be this long, complicated process. Just close the Channel Tunnel, put sharks in the English Channel to deal with the refugees, cut all the computer cables that tie your bank to the European bank, and you're done. Say, we've gone off on our own. What are you going to do, invade? Now, meanwhile, European Union President Jean-Claude Juncker is now demanding the leaders of the member states of the EU ban all future in-out referendums out of his fear that the voters will choose to leave. How dare those voters leave the European Union? Do you know how long and hard we've worked to make them our slaves, and now they want to leave? Remember, as John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And he's absolutely right. The European Union is a failed experiment. It's been an economic disaster for all of the member states. It's been great for Brussels and the ECB. The money junkies are making money hand over fist, and they love that. But it's not very good for ordinary people. And it sort of reveals that the attitude of the world's elites is basically, screw the ordinary people and what they want. They only exist to make us rich, to breed us new workers and soldiers and consumers. That's the only thing they're here for. If we didn't have a use for them, we'd eradicate them all, the useless eaters. More and more, the people of planet Earth are beginning to see the true nature and character of those who would claim to be our rulers. It's not very pleasant. And we've been through this before. During the French Revolution, the American Revolution, when you begin to realize just what your leaders are really like. Our Washington, D.C. is really just a giant septic tank, and the really big chunks keep rising to the top. Now, the Education Association is already up in arms over Trump's nominee, Betsy DeVos, for Education Secretary. Because of her stance against Common Core. Pardon me. Now, we know, we've been talking about Common Core for a long time. It's not good education. It is indoctrination. It's participation trophies. It's a system to make the next generation of Americans think they're educated and know what's going on, while in fact dumbing them down. and just teaching them it's okay to believe what we tell you to believe. And that may be good for tyranny and dictatorship. It's lousy for the economy. Right now, America's millennial generation has been described as virtually useless in the global economy. They don't have skills. They don't know how to do things. They don't know how to make things. They don't know how to solve problems. And so it's time for Common Core to go away. I mean, Common Core, it was certainly a boon for the publishers of school textbooks because all the old textbooks had to be thrown away, sent to the landfills, and all new Common Core compliant textbooks had to be sold. That was a huge amount of money. So, one of the things Common Core teaches, of course, is human-caused global warming is real. And as we get in here close to the 1st of December, a little bit of news to report on that. It is snowing in Saudi Arabia. It's below freezing over there. Now, when you think of Saudi Arabia, certainly I do, you think Lawrence of Arabia. You know, and heat waves shimmering in the distance. Camels. You don't think about snowball fights and snow sheiks. But that's what's happening. In Shakra and the northwestern city of Tabuk, they have snow on the ground. The temperature's below freezing. Now, down in Australia, they've got snow falling in Tasmania, which is kind of a shock when you realize they're just days away from the official start of summer down there. So what are the carbonazis going to do about that? Well, they're already out there saying, the global warming pause is back. And the ice is increasing. The global warming is real. It's just on pause. Somebody hit the pause button, and you shouldn't doubt global warming and the need for a carbon tax. Even though we've got another cold winter coming on in, they're predicting it'll be the coldest winter in the last 5 years, but don't you dare let it cause you to doubt human-caused global warming, because after all, politicians told you humans were warming the earth, and corporate media told you humans are warming the earth, and don't you dare not believe that. When you see all these pictures of snow and ice that are coming up all over the independent media, remember, they're the fake news. So, they're back to making excuses. The heat is hiding in the bottom of the ocean. It's the pause. Now, as I mentioned before, Donald Trump is out there saying he is going to defund those programs in NASA that involved monitoring planet Earth. In other words, sitting up there in their control rooms, looking at the satellites that were looking down on Earth and trying to find evidence that humans were warming the planet. And there were some real embarrassments. One of the NOAA weather satellites was over-reporting temperatures on the ground by about 10 degrees. It was caught, not by NOAA, but by an outside scientist saying, wait a minute, this stuff isn't matching what we're seeing on the ground sensors. NOAA finally deleted the data from their databases, but it's still being cited by the global warming people as proof the world is warming. Human-caused global warming isn't science, it's politics. And so all these people at NASA, and NASA's had a few accomplishments, but let's be very honest. Right now, the United States cannot get our own astronauts up to that International Space Station that, for the most part, we built that. And we can't even get up there anymore. We're having to buy our rocket engines from Russia because we've forgotten how to do that. Because after all, we're sitting around waiting for the polar bears to drown over there at NASA. So I think it's time for that nonsense to go away, and I think by the time inauguration comes around, it's going to be very obvious that there is no global warming. So Donald Trump is out there retasking NASA to explore the entire solar system. And I think this is amazingly a good idea for a couple of reasons. I've already mentioned the technology incubator aspect. If we're going to regain our preeminence as a manufacturing society, we need new technologies that will lead to new products and new industries. Those nations that our previous regime foolishly allowed to take over the manufacturing of high-tech products our nation invented during Apollo. Those nations aren't going to be stupid enough to give it back. They're going to hang on to that. So we have to leapfrog ahead of them. And a civilian technology incubator can do that. It certainly worked in the 1960s. It can work in the 2017s, 2018, 2019. Now, obviously, for those of us who are science enthusiasts, we're curious. We'd like to see if there's life under the ice on Europa. I'd like to see if there's life in the methane pools on Titan. I would like to see vindication for Dr. Gilbert Levin that there is, in fact, indigenous life on Mars. And by the way, they just announced they found a subterranean ocean there. There's a lot more water on Mars than they previously thought. I'd like to see that. I'm curious. And I had sort of mentioned before that I'm not all that enthusiastic about seeing the American flag on other bodies in the solar system. But you know something right now that might not be a bad thing? Because looking around at America right now, we've been told for decades what we have to be angry about, even if it was made up. We're angry about racism, angry about LGBT, angry about this, angry about that. You know what's missing? Something for us to feel good about, something to make us proud. And I remember when we had that space program, even when other bad things were going on, Americans could still look to that and feel good about their nation, feel that we were great. Now, if you're my age, you will remember the Apollo 8 mission. This was the mission that first actually went to the moon. And it simply orbited the moon, and it came right on back. It didn't have the lunar module. In fact, the LEM wasn't ready. The original plan was that Apollo 8 was going to test the LEM in orbit, but it wasn't ready. So they decided to send Apollo 8 to the moon, and Apollo 9 got to do the first test flight of the LEM. And after it was all over and Apollo 8 was on its way back, I mean, we were seeing all this Vietnam protests, Richard Nixon, all the corruption was coming on out. It was a terrible, terrible time. And Mission Control in Houston got a lot of telegrams of congratulations, including from Charles Lindbergh, who was living on Maui at the time. And the best one of all, and they made a point of this when Tom Hanks did his series From the Earth to the Moon, which is a really good series. It does capture the feel of what it was like back then. There was a telegram that came in that simply said, "You saved 2008." And that's what I mean. Americans need to have a reason to feel proud of their country. It's not just enough to say, be proud of your country. Okay, where? Now, obviously, the fact that we all overcame the media bias and the corrupt political machine to get Donald Trump into the White House is something we can all take pride in. But we need to be thinking about after the inauguration. And I see Donald Trump's rededication of NASA to the exploration of the solar system as something that could capture the imagination of the American people and give us something that we're going to feel really, really good about. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and they started the Mercury program, and it was just this amazing excitement that everybody had. And I know I talk about how I'm getting on in years, and I am, let's be honest. And I look back and I remember I was actually born at a time when there were no satellites in orbit, when a lot of people still actually believed there was an intelligent civilization on Mars. It wasn't far out wacko stuff. It was a serious discussion. And to see all of the history of space exploration happen during my lifetime to where we are right now. And I remember just how exciting it was, and I was building model rockets out of discarded food cans. They didn't fly. These were non-flying. I didn't get into flying models until much, much later in life, but I would build them and paint them, and I had them all over the place. Just that enthusiasm that we were doing something like that. I think we need to recapture that. I think that would be a really, really good thing. And I'm definitely fully supportive of Donald Trump and his retasking of NASA. And I think it could become a major highlight of making America great again. Because we're not going to be great again until we start believing that we're great again, and we're not going to believe that we're great again until we see ourselves doing something great. And bombing other countries into submission is not it. Let's grab a phone call here. Steve in Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi there. I was going to ask you a couple things. I had a question about we saw an article or two about the chemical weapons there were some used, of course, in Syria, but I guess by the U.S.-supported ISIS. And then we saw another article, though, where it said that Hillary was somehow involved in the chain of command or had a key role in that occurring, and then, of course, blaming it on Assad,
Yes.
Did you have any comments on that, or is that pretty accurate as far as you?
Yeah, well, I mean, even the UN concluded that was what was going on. And I remember when they were doing the big push, Assad has weapons of mass destruction. He's using chemical weapons on his own people. And I often use that as an example when I'm asked, how do you know if a story is real or not? And my reply is, well, these days, assume anything coming from the corporate media or a politician is a lie until proven otherwise. But coming out of that Assad thing, I said, all you need to do to tell if a story is fake is look for what should be there and isn't. If there's a missing piece, you're being fed a lie. And when Kerry and Obama were out there saying that Assad was gassing his own Alawite supporters with chemical weapons right in front of the UN inspectors, what was missing was a reason for Assad to do something that stupid. And because they couldn't come up with a motive, that's why we knew it was a lie. Steve, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and I'm getting to the end of the news that I wanted to cover, so feel free to start calling on in here. We're now getting an update. The Pennsylvania State Department says that Jill Stein missed the deadline for a recount, and as we reported earlier, Wisconsin has rejected the Stein request for a state recount by hand. They're leaving it up to the individual counties if they want to do a recount by hand or just run the ballots through the machines again. So this whole thing has cratered, and that means Hillary has her place in the history books. She's the first presidential candidate to lose 3 in a row, 2008, 2016, and now the 2016 recount, 3 strikes, and you're out of here. Not that I'm bitter. Now then, as you know, Apple has been having some problems. Apparently, their latest iOS update is shutting off phones and tablets while 30% of the battery still remains, and they're working to fix it. My question is, why were they tinkering with it to begin with? Why do you have to take something that's working fine and then go on in and muck about with it as opposed to like coming out with something that's going to make our lives better? And iPhone usage has sort of plateaued. Apple's business model, and indeed the business model of so many other companies, was you will buy the next hip version every so many years. And I like to have the latest, hippest version. I'm on an iPhone 5. I guess they're up to 7? But that business model does not work in an economy where ordinary people are struggling to feed themselves and their families. I'm going to keep this iPhone 5 until it actually dies. Then I'll deal with getting some kind of an upgrade. But if it's an elective, people aren't buying the stuff. The iWatch has not been a very good seller. And a lot of people are saying that after next year's iPhone release, nobody's really sure where Apple can go with this. Nobody's really seeing any kind of a new feature that can be added to the phone that will be a significant attractor. And so that's kind of upset. Now, getting onto the world of online censorship, this is getting to be a big, big problem. Apparently, Megyn Kelly has a book out, and Amazon has taken it onto itself to remove comments, reviews of her book that they have deemed politically motivated. Well, again, we don't go to Amazon to have them think for us and decide for us. I go to Amazon to get Grand Tour and vaxxed. So I think we need to go back to that idea of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, has to be part of our society, including corporations, and we need to get there. By the way, as you know, Twitter has gone on a binge of canceling accounts of people who don't like Hillary Clinton, and apparently by accident suspended their own CEO's Twitter account. Whoopsie! We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I'm looking at the collapse of Jill Stein's recount effort. And Pennsylvania has now announced she missed the deadline. It's not going to happen. And that means that all that money that was donated to Jill Stein, well, she just gets to keep that. That's what's going to, they don't call it the Green Party for nothing, because Jill is now rolling in the green. So it's a failed effort, and it was a desperate effort. And it was poorly timed, because something that people didn't recognize was going to be a factor. Hillary's recount forced a lot of the election's people to have to work through this past Thanksgiving weekend, and that's not going to build anybody's sympathy. So it was a Hail Mary pass, and I do not for a second think that Jill Stein did this all on her own, and it's a complete utter failure. And so right now, for the next 3 weeks, the only way that Hillary can get the White House now is to assassinate Donald Trump. And when you look at all the people in the Clintons' history who've died under suspicious circumstances, it's a real possibility. Donald Trump is going into the White House with as many different elements opposed to him as John F. Kennedy did. One of the dead bodies is Seth Rich, who was the DNC insider suspected of being the source of the DNC email leak to WikiLeaks, who was then shot dead in the early hours near his home, was called a robbery by the police and the corporate media, even though nothing was taken. Still had his watch, still had his wallet, still had his cell phone. They didn't take anything. There's been a break in the case because as they go around the area where the murder took place and looked at security camera footage, they've discovered that he was killed by 2 assailants, not 1. And they think they have a face. And the family has put out offers of a reward for anybody who can name these people, assuming they themselves are not already dead, buried in Fort Marcy Park. But it's a real risk, a real problem. And if anybody from the Donald Trump campaign is monitoring this show, and I'm going to assume that you are, because everybody else does, please take care of the Donald. Now then, corporate pharmaceutical, the medical industrial complex is continuing their war against alternative natural homeopathic treatments. We're seeing the corporate media declare war on the independent media, the people's right to inform themselves. We're seeing the medical industrial complex declaring war on organic, natural treatments, homeopathy, supplements. It's a war on our right to treat ourselves for our own diseases, to keep us dependent under their control. Is really what it's all about. So they're pushing for this huge law, and it's working its way through the system, where they're going to require homeopathic treatments to carry a label saying they do not work. This is from the U.S. government. Now, how does the U.S. government know they don't work? Well, because the FDA says so. And the CDC says so. You know, the same people who told you vaccines are not linked to autism. You know, if you're not the mainstream science, then you're just nothing. Homeopathic treatments have been around for a very, very long time. It was created in 1796. And when I was a kid, growing up in the New England farmlands, I got treated with a lot of these methods. And I can tell you they do work. Sometimes a lot better than what is sold at the pharmacies, and certainly with far fewer side effects. Now, there's an alarm bell being rung over at Natural Blaze because right now, as you know, Crohn's disease is a serious issue, or at least that's what TV is telling us, and they're developing a Crohn's disease vaccination over in Great Britain. Now, the vaccine targets MAP, M-A-P, a bacteria found in 80% of Crohn's sufferers, but not all of them, which suggests that it might not actually have anything to do with it. If you have Crohn's sufferers who don't have this bacteria, on what basis do you think attacking that bacteria is going to have any effect on the Crohn's disease? The bacteria may be opportunistic. It may find itself better able to infect and propagate inside Crohn's sufferers, yet not be the cause of the disease. There's still a great deal of controversy over whether the HIV virus actually causes AIDS or is simply an opportunistic infection. We're going to take a break here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443 if you'd care to call on in. And we're talking about science and health right now. We're talking about a vaccine for Crohn's disease that targets a bacteria that is not present in all Crohn's sufferers. So it's a very weak justification to begin with. It's a rush to have another product to sell to you. Now, as I was mentioning before we went to our acknowledgement of the on-air affiliates, there's still a very strong debate going on over whether the HIV virus is the actual cause of AIDS. You need to remember, back when this was all becoming an issue, there was this fight between Dr. Robert Gallo here in the United States and the Pasteur Institute in France over who was going to first discover the cause of AIDS so that they could patent it and have the exploitation economically. And a lot of people are thinking they may have jumped the gun and declared HIV to be the cause of AIDS, which is why no AIDS cures have been coming along. A lot of treatments for AIDS, a lot of treatments for the symptoms, that's where the big money is. Nobody wants to actually cure a disease because then you go away and they don't get more money from you. But we know there's a lot of reckless science going on in big pharma, and getting on back to that documentary Vaxxed, which you can see on Amazon Prime. And Claire and I watched it, and we bought a bunch of them to give out as Christmas presents. Now, here's where this Crohn's disease vaccine is very questionable, because vaccinations are blamed for causing autoimmune disorders, including Crohn's disease. The problem with vaccines is they don't actually necessarily build up your body's immunity. They can compromise it. And Crohn's disease is a disease that you get from a compromised immune system. So they're coming up with a vaccine that can cause Crohn's disease to vaccinate you against Crohn's disease. You can see why maybe a lot of people are scratching their head on this one. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Andy in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, Mike, nice to talk to you again. One of the biggest things I've noticed is wrong in our country right now is the fact that corporations are all around us. Okay, now back when corporations were founded, and the government actually legitimized what a corporation was, but they had a charter. They had to state what their project was, and then they would pay for a corporation and have that amount of time to do it, and then they had to dissolve the corporation. From what I understand, the Rockefellers bribed somebody in New Jersey, and that person took it to court and stuff, and then these briberies kept going on, and now we have all these corporations in which we are now looking at are running our government through their financial means and stuff. But I do believe corporations had a charter. They were supposed to be dissolved as soon as the charter time was up. Okay, so I got a corporation. I want to build this building. It's going to take me 14 years. Okay, the corporation is over in 14 years. You have to go and folly for another one, if you will. What do you
Yeah,
think
no, you're absolutely right. Corporations originally had charters with time limits on it. The charters that were granted to the first and second banks of the United States had 20-year expirations on them. The charter granted for the third bank of the United States of America, the Federal Reserve, had a longer time period, but it did have an expiration date. That was then extended to 100 years. And then in the 1930s, about the same time as what you're talking about with the Rockefellers, Congress basically declared the charter open-ended, even though that went against what the purpose of the charter was. All corporations today still have charters, but the charter can simply say, you know, we're in business to make money selling fashion accessories, and in this age of acquisition and diversification, the original corporate charter is little more than something that they hang on the wall as a decoration.
Well, and you know we're really looking at the detriment part of our country right now, because the corporations have determined our future.
Well, corporations,
with the help of those who are above them.
Okay, well, you need to go back a little bit to understand why they became a danger. Prior to corporations, companies were owned by individuals, and the lifespan of the company was that of the owner. When the owner died, there would be death taxes imposed, and the company would either be sold or somehow change shape. It was a way of recycling accumulated wealth back into the society. And if you go back, this is something ceremonial done even in ancient cultures. You know, when the really rich chief died, his wealth would be divided among the village. They didn't simply give it all to his son and say, move forward from there. Of course, in the Middle Ages, that changed. But that's what it was about, was the ceremonial redistribution of wealth into society to keep the economy working. And the problem was, once you had corporations, you literally created an immortal entity that could go on accumulating wealth long after the people who created the corporation had died, and they were safe from death taxes and any of that other. So they accumulated enough wealth to eventually get this ridiculous idea that corporations are persons now for the purposes of the Bill of Rights. But of course, a fetus is just a lump of tissue that you can throw in the trash whenever you feel like it, which tells you how upside down our society is. Corporations can serve a good purpose, but when you allow the unbridled, uncontrolled concentration of wealth into just a few hands, it destabilizes the economy and society as a whole. And we're already there with all of this 1%. And they've got all this wealth, they've rigged the system to bring more wealth to them, and then they're sitting around crying, wondering why ordinary Americans don't have the money to go into the shopping malls and buy Christmas presents.
Well, so the bottom line here is that the entire idea of a corporation has been totally inverted, and exactly what the law stated when they first could incorporate has been totally inverted to now they're running the show. And they really are, because it's their money that's bought and paid for all this stuff that's going on.
It's complicated by the fact that we have evolved a permanent political class who are willing to sell out to the corporate interests.
Exactly.
So it's actually a two-pronged problem. It would be nice to see some of these corporations broken up under the antitrust, anti-monopoly laws, but we're in an age right now where monopolies are being encouraged in order to maximize profitability. And it's all come about because we have a central federal government that would sell their own mother for $1. These are hereditary. These are not ordinary Americans in Washington, D.C. For the most part, they're lawyers, inherited wealth, CEOs. They're there to make themselves richer, and they got there by basically ignoring what was going on in the streets of America.
Exactly, man. Just look at AT&T. That's a perfect example. They just bought DirecTV. They sublet all of their cell phone towers and stuff to places like Cricket, which I'm calling on, which is sad. So we people who use AT&T, you can't use that call-in number to listen to your radio station. They can't do it.
They can't?
They just simply can't do it. No, they can't. Not with AT&T. AT&T calls you up and says you get 3 hours in your pay period that you can listen to a radio show on the phone, and if after that, we're charging you. I got a $300 bill for listening to you guys on a rate on.
Ouch. Well, you know, maybe.
And I have unlimited phone too. So that's so.
Well,
and there's commercials out there that actually say leave AT&T alone. If AT&T don't use this number. And I didn't know Cricket was backed by AT&T, but they also backed several other people. And so, we're in a situation here, but you know,
Andy, can I back up? Andy, I want to back up. Here.
Back up.
You're on Cricket, which is sublet by AT&T. Your plan is for unlimited talk, and yet when you call our radio show on the phone number, not the data line, on the phone number, they're still charging you past 3 hours?
Oh yeah, no. I can get 3 hours in an entire month. That's all they allow is 3 hours to listen to you guys. That's one show. So I can listen to one of your shows on that radio station with AT&T. And I didn't know this. I thought it was Cricket. I thought Cricket had their own lines, but then I later found out that AT&T backs up Cricket, and we use a lot of their stuff. But there are radio shows out there that have commercials that specifically say, here's a number for you if you want to listen to this, but by the way, don't use AT&T. But they didn't say it was going to rip you off and charge you extra money for it. They just said don't use AT&T because they were listening in. So that was their kind of way of subtly saying don't use AT&T. And I didn't know until I got a $300 bill from listening to you guys on the radio. I listened to a lot of shows on the radio.
Okay, can I clarify? You say listen on the radio as opposed to calling the Listen Live line. Okay.
No, I listen to you. I use my data right now. To listen to you guys.
Okay, well that may be different.
Calling the radio line, though, cost me $300 if I go over 3 hours.
Okay, well obviously you've got a data cap. You may have unlimited talk, but that's not the same thing as your data cap. You really do have to look at those plans very, very, very carefully. And
just a number.
Say again?
It's just a phone number. I dial a phone number, and then boom, I clicked into Mike Rivero's radio.
Okay, are you... when you say you dial my number, are you using the regular phone app and you're calling 605-562-5111?
I'm not exactly sure right in front of me, but I have yours, I have Alex Jones's, I have RBN's phone number pretty much.
Okay, I think you need to go to Cricket and sort this out with them because it's not making a lot of sense. But at this point, I would not at all be surprised to see an organized program of trying to limit access to the independent media by all of these corporations here. Andy, I'm going to have to let you go.
That was the point.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Talk to you people at Cricket. We're going to switch over to Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Going back to this fake news, alternative news stuff, this guy, Richard Spencer, who the Atlantic did a documentary on,
yes,
who says he's not a white nationalist. I'm telling you, this guy's bad news. And he said some things about sending some people back home. He is bad news. I would not phone to that honeypot at all if I was anybody.
Well, you know, again, we get the supporters of the George Soros New World Order, global government, blur everybody together, are out there screaming that if you are opposed to illegal immigrants, you're being racist. No, we're not. Illegal is not a race. We're talking about criminal behavior. Again, we almost lost this country to the illegal immigrant vote. It got really, really close. And we have votefraud.org and now truethevote.org are both out there saying there were millions of illegal immigrant votes cast for Hillary Clinton. And that literally giving our country away that we built generation after generation to a bunch of illegal immigrants in exchange for that Oval Office. That's the crime Hillary Clinton was trying to perpetrate.
Well, and that's what Obama said about if you are a citizen, you are able to vote. And then he comes out and says, no, I wasn't telling you illegal immigrants to vote. That's all semantics. Somebody who is in this country illegally, who probably doesn't, I don't want to be racist or anything, but who probably doesn't have a great command of the English language, hears what our president says, and immediately is going to think, if I go out and vote, I guess I'm a citizen. So I'm going to be out there voting.
Well, it was a little more overt than that, where Obama came on out and said that any illegals who were voting, nothing was probably going to happen to you. The real question is, why did any of these people even get a voter registration form to begin with? Kyle, we got to take a break for commercials here. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, has anybody seen Brian Pagliano around anywhere. Remember, Hillary's IT guy got an immunity deal and still pled the fifth over her email server. Is he still alive, or do we need to put his face on a milk carton? That's what I want to know. All right, let's take some phone calls. Gary in Arkansas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon. I had a statement about corporations. I heard this, it's been a long time ago, but being in a corporation or being incorporated is a privilege. And one of the reasons for having that privilege was that the corporation had to be engaged in a business that benefited the public. And so if their endeavors were not for the benefit of the public, that incorporation was denied. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think that would make a lot of sense, but you can say something on your charter like we're in business to produce medicines to help sick people get better, and then you can turn it into one of these vaccine companies, and technically you're not in violation of your charter until somebody comes back and proves that you were, engaged in some kind of fraud in terms of the product. So, but again, as an overview, this nation was set up where the people were supposed to be above every other level of society that included the government and the corporations and the banks themselves. And over time, of course, our society has become inverted where the money now rules all and corruption is rampant. I'm really hoping Trump can do something to reverse it, but we could still be headed toward a Soviet Union-style collapse in the very near future.
Yeah, I got a couple of little tidbits I'd like to throw out. The first one is backed by U.S. code. I don't know the number and all that, but all the public offices in the United States at the federal level, I know for sure. I'm not sure about the state, county, local, and all that other stuff, has been turned over or given to the United Nations. Now,
I would want to see the actual site on that one. And
there is one. I looked it up. I can't pull it out of my hat right now. But there is a code, U.S. code, or it's a code of federal regulations, or.
Well, I need to see that. Now I know that control over certain lands in the United States has been ceded to the United Nations, but I question this idea that federal government officers are somehow now pledged allegiance to the United Nations. Again, I'd want to see the actual U.S. code. Okay?
It's gone beyond that by executive order. I heard this was within the last month. That not only now by the codes that the office has been turned over to the UN, but the officials themselves have been turned over to the UN.
Well, I'd want to see some documentation on that. As far as Obama's executive orders are concerned, first of all, most of them are actually illegal because it's exceeding the authority of the executive branch, and all of them can be overturned by Donald Trump with the stroke of a pen.
Yeah, well, see, his executive orders only apply to employees or those that are a part of the administrative branch. That doesn't have anything to do with you and I, and that's been proven
absolutely right
in the case.
Absolutely correct.
Excuse me?
I said you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, so I've got, we both basically got dual citizenship now.
Again, I'd want to see some actual title, U.S. code to that. I've been hearing about it. I want to see some documentation. Anyway, Gary, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we've had a caller into the show who is now hung up, and I'm getting a bunch of emails all confirming that, yes, even with unlimited talk, these phone companies are all charging to dial our Listen Live line. I was completely unaware of this. It's another form of censorship. So if this is happening to you, the proper response is apparently unlimited doesn't really mean unlimited, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. I think the solution is all of you should start calling your local talk radio stations and refer them to Republic Broadcasting so that you can listen to this programming over the air and not have to pay for it. Makes perfect sense to me. Just find your local talk radio station and tell them these are very popular shows out here on the independent media, and they can only help build their audience. Now, let's go back to the phones here. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. It's about the corporations. Because you're talking about corporations, I wanted to tell you about a lecture I heard of one. I heard the lecture. It was the history of the corporation. And this guy was telling that, even as far back as Rome, there was something like the corporation. But then in modern times, he told us that the founding fathers did not want us, the United States, to have corporations. And they said, no, spank your hands, no. But little by little, they kept pestering, and the government finally said, okay, you can have a corporation. But there was a list of regulations. And that through the years, little by little, one by one, the regulations on corporations disappeared, and the last regulation on corporations was signed away by Bill Clinton.
I'm not surprised at all. And
he has since apologized for that, in fact.
Well, Bill Clinton apologized for stealing Hawaii. It doesn't mean they gave it back.
Right.
I'm sorry, Bill Clinton's any apology is meaningless unless there is some kind of remedy or redress. And if they apologize, we did bad. I did a bad thing. We're going to leave things as they are right now, but it was bad, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
Yeah. And I find just the essence of a corporation to be fundamentally evil. Because I'm living here in Paris and I'm an English teacher, I've found that, in fact, in French, there's a word, corporation. But it's a false friend. It's not the same meaning at all. And when I compared the definitions of corporation in French, which is something like a union, it doesn't really exist. But in English, it seems to be designed to protect the people the owners, the CEO, the people in the corporation from any financial responsibility.
Yeah, that's true here in the United States of America, and that's one of the reasons why people like to have corporations, because if your corporation goes bust, your own personal fortune is protected. Now, if you're running a proprietorship, like a store or something, and you go out of business, your creditors can attach your personal wealth to settle your debts, and corporate law is designed to prevent the corporate officers from going through that. Now, at the same time, though, if the creditors can prove criminal acts by the corporate officers, those protections are voided immediately.
Wow. But how often does that happen?
Well, it certainly happened in the case of Bernie Madoff. It was obvious he was committing a fraud, and so the corporate protections for his little Ponzi scheme didn't apply, which is why the creditors went after his own personal wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Well, anyway, we can thank Bill Clinton for the very last restriction on corporations being removed.
Well, we can thank Bill Clinton for an awful lot of stuff here, none of which was good. But again, like banks, corporations can serve a useful purpose, but they do have to be controlled. And the proper role of our central government is to maintain the overview, the long view, what's best for the nation. and balance the necessities of the general population against the corporate interests, our country has gone completely over to fascism, where our government is perfectly aligned with corporate interests against the general population. And by the way, that's Benito Mussolini's definition of what fascism is really all about. And he's absolutely right, and that's where we are right now. Okay?
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Michael.
Merci. We'll let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now then, we're getting the early retail spending data from Black Weekend. Today's, of course, Cyber Monday, and they're hoping they're going to do better from that. But even taking into account the online shopping, shoppers spent less this year on Black Friday weekend than they did last year. There's been a lot of news stories about, they're out there, they're buying like crazy, trying to goad you into getting on there and maxing out that plastic and buying stuff. But the reality, the numbers are not good. It's going to be another disastrous Christmas shopping season. Now, interesting little story. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, I think this is over in Europe. Pardon me. Let me just take a quick look at this, because this just came through. And this is in Great Britain via Russia Today. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has reaffirmed that Christmas is not offensive to people of other faiths. In other words, go ahead and enjoy your Christmas, and anybody who's out there who's screaming they find it offensive, just tell them, fine, be offended. So it's a strike back at political correctness. And I grew up with Christmas. I love Christmas. I'm not religious. I like Santa Claus. I like making a big deal about it. All right, we're going to take a couple of stories here real quick before we go back to the phones here. The other day, Rosie O'Donnell came out with an observation asking if Barron Trump, Donald's son, has autism. And I commented at the time that this was not going to look good for Rosie O'Donnell, because if it's true, then Rosie O'Donnell comes across looking like mean-spirited picking on him. If it's not true, she looks like she's just trying to find another way to smear him, although why anybody would think the less of Donald Trump if Barron has autism is a mystery to me. Rosie O'Donnell has now clarified the situation, and what it is Rosie O'Donnell's own 3-year-old daughter just got diagnosed with high-functioning autism. And she's out there saying, I didn't mean any ill will, it's just I know what the symptoms are, and I was just asking. This is actually going to work out very well for us, because we now have these influential people, Rosie O'Donnell, Robert De Niro, possibly Donald Trump, who are aware there is something going on with autism in this country. And as I said before, if you have a subscription to Amazon Prime, you can find the documentary Vaxxed there. I think it's about a $5 rental. And it's worth it. It's worth every penny of it. Claire and I watched it. We bought a whole bunch of them. These are our Christmas present. Here, look at this. Now, the numbers in this documentary are staggering, and it shows us there is a problem. At the turn of the century, autism was virtually unknown. Nobody knew what it was. And by 1979, 1980, it was like 1 in 10,000 kids had autism. And now, all of a sudden today, it's 1 out of every 50 or 60. It's an exponential growth problem. At this rate, 50% of all children, mostly the males, are going to be born, are rather not born with, they're going to come down with autism. That means half the American population will not be able to do any work, and a significant portion of the remaining American workforce is going to be tied up in supportive care. Even if they go to the extreme of euthanizing children diagnosed with autism, we're still looking at a declining workforce until the reason for the autism is dealt with honestly and fairly. So again, Vaxxed, the documentary, you need to be looking at it. And somebody needs to send a copy to Rosie O'Donnell. I'm probably going to be sending a copy to the White House once Trump is in there. Because it is a major problem. And in the short term, it makes great profits for the pharmaceutical industries. In the long term, it could collapse our entire society. All right, let's go to James in Tokyo. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I only had a turkey cup of noodles. If you and Claire were decent people, you would have sent me a leg or something like that.
Well,
anyway,
I hate to break your heart. We had a meatloaf.
Okay, Mike. I want to talk about the recount. I don't know why they're doing it. I know it's not for the recount itself. These things are highly supervised. Hillary's not going to cheat or throw away different votes, and all we'll do is reaffirm that Trump was properly elected. And maybe there were some immigrants, illegals that came up, and it'll even reaffirm it even more. So I think there's a different reason, either Hillary Stein...
Well, hang on. 1 second there. First of all, the problem with our current election system is when they're going back to recount the votes, they can't identify the votes that were cast by illegal immigrants, non-citizens who were not supposed to vote. There's no tracking whatsoever. So they can't go back and say these many votes were illegal. And remember, in the early part of this year, how Hillary's lawyers were running all over this country trying to strike down voter ID laws because they knew they were going to be doing this. As far as what's going on, to be very honest, I think this was a shoot from the hip act of desperation, where Podesta, after nursing his black eye and everything, went over to Jill and said, if we could reverse Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Hillary will be the president. Let's get a recount going there and get it so messed up, we'll either get a reversal there or we'll take those 3 states out of the Electoral College, in which case we would need only 8 faithless electors to hand the White House to Hillary Clinton. I think that was their real plan. Was Florida 2000 all over again? Pennsylvania's locked up in the courts, can't participate in the Electoral College. Wisconsin's locked up in the courts, can't participate in the Electoral College. Michigan locked up, can't participate. That would bring Trump and Hillary Clinton very close together. They would only need 8 faithless electors, and Hillary already has 6 Trump electors saying that they will vote for her. And I think that was their real plan. But now it's cratered. Pennsylvania has said she's missed the deadline. She'd need a court case anyway to force a recount. They're certified for Donald Trump. Michigan has certified for Donald Trump. They already had a recount by hand because their original result was so close, it triggered a mandated recount. And now Wisconsin is out there saying they're refusing a statewide recount. If the counties want to recount, they can do it. But I don't expect to see that happen because too many of those people were forced to work over the Thanksgiving weekend because of this nonsense. It was a Hail Mary desperation pass. It's made Hillary look like a sore loser again. The Democrats look like a sore loser. Jill Stein, I think her career as a politician is pretty much over, but she's probably going to walk out of this whole mess with about $4 to $5 million in her pocket.
Well, that's a good payday, but Pizzagate, if it's true or not, do you think maybe Podesta did that to just try and take attention away from that?
Could very well be, or to try and find another way to embarrass the independent media. I'm once again being flooded with emails about space aliens and, Planet X and HARP and chemtrails and, all this other nonsense. That you would think after this many years they would realize I don't post those kinds of stories. If you want to see those kind of stories posted, go over to Disinformation, whatever that Democratic group in California is that's running all the bogus websites. Disinfomedia, that's the name of it.
Except you're really nice, except to Rosie O'Donnell. I mean, I've seen the video, pictures of her on her boat, shaving her face with an electric razor, and Trump was out of line for calling her that bad name.
Well, I kind of agree, but it was also out of line for the corporate media to try and convince us that we should pick our next president on the basis of whether they're politically correct or not. When my plumbing explodes, I want a good plumber, and if he comes on over here and he's swearing and cursing and using bad language, I don't care, because he's here to fix the pipes, not be politically correct. The same thing with Donald Trump. We hired him to fix this country, not be politically correct.
Hey, have a great day, Mike.
All right.
Nice talking to you again.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, getting on back to the medical industrial complex, story coming out of Natural Blaze. Apparently, new documents have surfaced showing Monsanto knew about the link between glyphosate and cancer 35 years ago. But it makes money, so we're going to sell it. It's the cornerstone of our GMO Roundup Ready universe, so of course we're going to sell it. You know, getting on back to vax, one of the things that's really kind of interesting, as you know, the U.S. government passed laws that made it impossible for the parents of, the families of people damaged by vaccines to sue the vaccine makers themselves. Instead, they have to go to this vaccine court, which is funded by the taxpayers. You, the taxpayers, get to pay for the damage the vaccine companies are causing. And the vaccine court all of a sudden was looking at this flood of claims coming on in and saying, we don't have this kind of money. They were literally looking at $1 trillion exposure, and that's why the CDC came out with this report saying there is no link between autism and vaccines. So the vaccine court could deny all these families of vaccine-damaged patients any kind of support or compensation. That was the mechanism there. Talk about ruthless, cold-blooded, heartless government policy. They're not going to fix the problem, and they're going to duck all the blame for it. And now, of course, we know that CDC report was completely bogus. They cherry-picked the data. You do have to see that documentary, Vaxxed. Knowing what it was all about, it was still a shock when Claire and I watched it. And they lay it out there with charts and graphs, and they make the case. I'm not surprised they put all this pressure on Robert De Niro to yank it from Tribeca and all these other festivals. They're terrified that you are going to see this thing. You have to see it, though. You have to see it. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Pardon me. Welcome back to our show here. And boy, the Hillaryites are not quitting. And I don't even know if Hillary's behind this, but remember, Hillary ran her campaign as a personality cult. And she brought in all of these fanatics, you know, the vagina vote, it's time for a woman president. And apparently Change.org has just launched a new petition, and they're demanding an audit of the entire 2016 presidential election. Well, first of all, this is grandstanding. The way the system is set up, you can't audit it. And if it were possible to audit, the first thing you're going to find is there's a lot of election fraud. And it was all on the part of Hillary's people. We got that from blackboxvoting.org and Bev Harris. But it's just insane. And this petition is back with the same thing. The FBI has determined Russia was hacking our election process. It's amazing. Supposedly, it has 260,000 signatures already. Probably from all the dead voters and illegal immigrants. Okay. Anyway, everybody is now finally acknowledging Donald Trump has 306 electoral college votes, with Michigan finally having certified. Meanwhile, over in Switzerland, they're coming up on a referendum this weekend on nuclear power. There's a referendum saying it's time for Switzerland to phase nuclear power out. If the voters choose yes, it would force 3 of the country's 5 reactors to close next year, and the remaining 2 by 2029. Now, my issue with nuclear power is the waste disposal issue. Nobody's ever solved that. Now, I think that with proper management, nuclear power can be handled safely. The problem is the safety decisions on nuclear power plants, the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig, the oil pipelines are always left up to the money junkies, who will always cut corners, specify less quality parts, and it leads to a disaster. And they dump the costs on the taxpayer and the people living around the disaster. But I think we can live without nuclear fission power, and we probably ought to. Maybe if there's a push against nuclear fission, there'll be an impetus to develop fusion or thorium cycle power. which is far less damaging and dangerous and harmful. The reason fission power is still being pursued by so many countries is, as a side benefit, you get bomb stuff out of it. Can't get bomb stuff out of a fusion reactor. Can't get bomb stuff from a thorium cycle reactor. Fission reactors, you get plutonium, things that go bang. Isn't that wonderful? So I kind of hope the Swiss go that way. I hope they do. But we do need to solve our energy crisis. But again, that might be something for our new civilian technology incubator at NASA to be thinking about. New ways to generate energy without needing oil, without needing coal, without risking radioactive contamination. Anything's possible. It just takes the will to go out and do it. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and do Jim Goddard's show up there in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. So until then, please remember you are all part of the independent media. Take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.